Hello everyone, this is the Bovine Terror, and today we are going to be creating the Empires of the Undergrowth Ant tier list. Now, today we are just going to be focusing on the ants on this list. There's a whole bunch of other creatures on this thing, I just didn't feel like making a new one, but these are the creatures that are on there, but we're just going to be doing the ants. So ignore everything else that's there. Maybe we'll do it some other day. I just don't care about that. I want to talk about the ants because I think they're the most interesting part of this. So, I won't get into a big ramble like I did with the Saurian tier list. I apologize about that. I probably should have edited that out, but let's just get started. So, starting off, So, just to clarify which ants I'm going to do. We are going to be looking at the Army Ant Media, the Army Ant Major, just the standard worker. They're kind of all the same, basically. The black ant, the leafcutter media, the leafcutter miners, which they're very similar to the workers, but I have an important distinction for them, so I still want to talk about them. The leafcutter majors that have the stun attribute, the leafcutter majors that have the taunt attribute, the melee wood ant soldiers. We're skipping the leafcutter minims because they're kind of weird. I don't know how to talk about them. They're just kind of a part of the leafcutters, so we're going to ignore them. The mortar ranged wood ants, the rapid fire ranged wood ants, the slave maker ants, and the trapjaw ants. And that is what we will be talking about today. So we'll just start from the top. So starting with the Army Ant Media. So, these guys I like a lot. These are probably my favorite just standard melee unit in the game. They're cheap. They're cheap. They're kind of weak units, but they actually have a really nice attack. Like, they have a higher attack than the black ants, which I think is really cool. But like, other than that, they're nothing special. They're just kind of cheap, weak little soldiers, but I kind of like that in this game. I kind of like the idea of having like high attack, cheap units. I really like them, so I'm going to put them in A because I think they're really, really good units. I love playing the other foot just so I can have a bunch of these guys. Like, it's just so much fun. I've actually considered trying to see if I can beat that level with just these guys, and workers, obviously. That might be a thing for the future if I can get my video games working on my computer while recording, so I'll have to think about that. Anyway, I'd say they're A. I just think they're really good. Yeah, I don't really have much else to say. I just think they're a nice little unit. Okay, the Army Ant Majors. It's kind of funny we're starting off really, really strong with this, because I think Army Ant Majors are definitely S tier. They're one of the best ant units in the game, period. What you get out of these units is just incredible, because they do something that basically none of the other units do, which is they buff their allies in the middle of combat. Now, I'm not talking about when you can get Royal Jelly in the normal... I'm not talking about all the like Royal Jelly abilities that you can get when you're playing in the Formicarium. I'm just talking about the baseline stats for all of these ants. Because yeah, you can upgrade a whole bunch of the other units and you can give them buffs so they can buff each other. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about baseline units, no Royal Jelly enhancements. Okay, so I tried to look up the information. It's a little unclear what happens. I think that it buffs all friendly ants. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry about this. If anybody knows, could you please comment, because I'd like to know. I tried to look it up, and there seems to be some confusion about how it actually works. However it works, it doesn't really matter, because even when they're buffing themselves, like, even if just one goes into rage and buffs themselves, it does so much damage. Like, they outpace the damage of any other thing in the game, barring one other unit that I will talk about later. They're just so good. They have a lot of health. I think they can buff their allies, which that by itself just makes them extremely powerful because no other ant can do that. And, like, yeah, they're really expensive, but it doesn't matter. They're so good that they are absolutely worth it. I would wager to say they are either the most powerful or maybe the second most powerful unit in the entire game. At least ant unit in the entire game. So absolutely S tier. They are amazing, amazing units. All right, next up is one of my favorite units in the game as well. Maybe not the most powerful, but one of the most, without a doubt, the most useful unit. And it is S tier. Absolutely, workers are so good. So if you just take workers and you say, oh, workers are necessary, because if you rank them highly and you're just like, oh well, that's a little unfair because workers are necessary, you have to have workers to be able to get more eggs to be put on your nest tiles, and once your army is big enough, you kind of need to have a lot of workers to be able to keep up putting eggs on all the nest tiles, because if you don't, you get a backlog and then your army can't replenish as fast as it needs to. So yeah, they're necessary to some degree. I think that's a fair reason to put them in S. But even without that, they're really good. So I started making a series on beating every single level with just workers, and it is absolutely possible. You can beat every single level in the game with just workers. I don't know about the extra levels. Okay, when I say every single level, I mean every single level in the campaign. I don't actually know about the extra levels. I will probably have to go back and try that at one point. But in the story levels, every single one of them you can beat with workers. Some of them you have to do easy, but as far as I can tell, there's only 2 of them that you have to play on easy. It seems like all the other ones you can play on medium and absolutely beat them, and I think there's quite a few of them you could even do on hard and still beat them. I think the only levels that you probably can't win with are on the insane levels. And even then, I think you might be able to beat Formicarium Challenge 1 on Insane with just workers. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if you could do that. Which just shows that, like, workers are really good. And, like, I know that you can buff them with Jelly, and that's the only way you can beat some of the Formicarium. That's the only way you can beat any of the Formicarium challenges with workers. So to some degree, this is kind of an unfair adjustment. But it doesn't matter because you could just put them into any of the normal levels and you can just have workers and they will win. It's typically not that hard. Like, it sounds way harder than you think it does. Like, I went into some of these levels thinking like, oh, this is gonna be a big challenge, and it really wasn't. It just was. It was a lot easier than I expected, and I realized workers are really not. They're not pushovers. Like, they're weaker than the other units fighting wise, but they're still quite powerful. You can swarm enemies quite effectively because they're so cheap. They can replenish themselves, unlike the other soldiers which have to have workers to replenish them. You can just if you just need more eggs right now, you could just say, okay, all my workers that are fighting, I want you to be on nest duty right now. Just put a bunch of eggs back down and then keep fighting. That way you can just let more workers spawn. Like, there's so much versatility that you can have with workers. They are really, really good. And honestly, like, they're an amazing unit. They're really, they're so versatile. You can do so much with them. They're not like the best at combat by any means. They're the worst at combat, but they're not pushovers. Like, they're quite good, and there are actually a lot of scenarios where I would just take a swarm of workers over like a handful of stronger units. Sometimes I think that is more useful. So workers, great, absolutely going to be S tier. All right, next are black ants. Black ants are fine. They're pretty standard units. The problem is they're kind of in a weird middle ground where like they're kind of on the weaker end of middle ground between the kind of mid-level soldiery ants. And what I'm talking about with this is the low level being the army ant media, where the army ant media are really cheap and they're really squishy, but they kind of do quite a bit of damage. But they're kind of, because they're so cheap, they're not great units, but you can buy a lot of them and then it kind of makes up for that. Black ants are kind of in that slot, but they're just to the point where they're so expensive that they start to become like a necessary, powerful unit instead of just this throwaway unit like you can have with a bunch of just army ant media. And so I gotta say, I don't think they're that good. Like, I gotta put them at C. And I would put them lower typically, but I just read on the wiki that they have resistance to AoE damage, which I didn't realize, which does actually make them a little more versatile, because it means that there are certain enemies that they can go up against that other ants would not be as effective against. Which is good to know. Like, it helps against rove beetles. Like, it helps against the AoE splash damage of mortar wood ants, which is extremely useful because I guess I'll spoil it a little bit. The army ant major or the mortar wood ant are the two best units in the game. It's one of those two are the best. So it's interesting that it counters one of the best units in the game. Like, that's very useful. So black ants are fine, but they're kind of at a weird point where I don't really like them because they're a little too expensive while also not being that powerful. Like, the media for the army ants, I don't know if I said this already, I'm going to say it again just in case. They outdamage the black ants, like, at all levels. At level 1, 2, and 3, they outdamage black ants. The black ants catch up quite a bit at level 3 because their rate of attacks increase, and they're faster than the army ant media at that point. But the army ant media still does more damage, just baseline. And it's the rate of attack I don't think is enough that it outdamages the media. So it's like, I would, do you take an ant that has a little more health, which I really should specify, it's only a little more health. It's only like 20 or 30 more health. Like, it's really not a lot. So, I don't know. It's kind of, I personally like the army ant media way more than the black ants. And there's kind of some other units that are kind of more expensive but more powerful than the black ants, and I like them a lot more. So black ants are kind of low on the list, unfortunately, and they're kind of the staple, like, soldier ant of this game, which is a little unfortunate, but I think they're fine. They're perfectly balanced. I don't think there's any problem with them. I just don't think they're that fun. Okay, going to leafcutter media. Before they were buffed, these guys absolutely were F tier ants. They were the worst unit in the game. I actually was planning to make a video showing how useless the leafcutter ant media were. And in the process of me making that video, they buffed them. And then I was like, okay, they're not totally useless, but they're still not great. The reason being, and I think I kind of have to do these together, but so just so you know, I'm going to put them in D, because they're not good. Why they're D, though, is because this ant, the leafcutter miner, is an S tier creature, and it's S tier above the normal workers. And for the sole reason that the only time you have the leafcutter miners, it's because you're playing a leafcutter game. And the leafcutter miners' utility and their usefulness skyrockets when you're just playing with leafcutters. So I'll explain myself. The leafcutter workers, the leafcutter miners, they do exactly the same things that the normal workers do, but because they're leafcutters, it's a totally different play style from all the other ants. And so the advantage, in theory, that the media has over the miners is that the media can carry more leaves, and they are faster than the miners when they're carrying leaves. And so that's supposed to make up for the fact that they cost 80 food to make, whereas the workers only cost 20 food to make. The problem is that the media can only take... So, okay, I kind of need to do some numbers just to kind of illustrate how this works, and I've done it in practice, and in practice it is so crystal clear, it's horrifying to watch sometimes. The reason I discovered this is because I was doing the worker-only challenges, and if you do worker-only challenges with the leafcutter level 3.1, that level If you do it with only workers, it is a breeze at medium difficulty, and it is only a little bit hard at hard difficulty. If you use only workers, that's no majors and no media. And if you do a combination of majors and minors, it's very easy. Like that is one of the few levels that I've beaten on insane difficulty with not a lot of difficulty, because I found out that media are kind of useless on that level. Because when you work out the math with this, you can get 3 leafcutter minors for the price of 1 leafcutter media. So what that means is that if that's the case, that means that the leafcutter media, in order to be as valuable as the workers, the media needs to be able to transport 3 times the amount of leaves that a single worker could do. The problem is the media only can carry twice as much, and they only move twice as fast as the workers when they're not carrying leaves. Why I specify that is because when the workers aren't carrying leaves, they are faster than the media, which means that, and they're not like a lot faster. It's not like they're double the speed of the media, but they're a little bit faster. And the problem is that if you just went into a game and you put in, like, let's just say we put in 10 media and we put in 30 workers. That's the same equivalent price, and we just let them go on level 3.1 and just saw how many leaves they could collect in a certain amount of time. I absolutely guarantee you the workers will collect way more leaves than the media will. Because the workers, not only will they collect more, they will process it faster. They just collect more. With 3 of them working at half the efficiency of 1 is better than 1 that works at double the efficiency of 3. The math, it's like you triple the numbers, even though they're only moving at half efficiency, you're still getting like 1.5 units worth of work out of it. I don't know if I'm making myself very clear with this. I hope I am. Basically, the workers, just having 3 workers is better than having 1 media in basically any scenario. Just collecting leaves, that is. Then the other point about this is that every time you make a leafcutter unit, you get a minim. And the minims are what process the leaves and turn them into fungus. When you get 3 workers, you also get 3 minims. And if you get 1 media, you only get 1 minim. Which means that even if the media could collect leaves faster than the 3 miners, which they can't, even if they could do that, it wouldn't matter because the minims wouldn't be numerous enough to process the leaves into fungus, which is how you use your points. So it means that even if they were better, it's still better to get more workers because you just get more minims, and then the minims give you fungus faster, and then you don't have a backlog of leaves when you're trying to get more fungus. You just create it as fast as possible. So there's not really any point in having media. Media are really useless, at least in collecting leaves. Now, you could say that, well, okay, that's fine, but the other argument is that a single media is a lot better combat-wise than 3 workers. And that is true. It is much better. The problem is there's already a combat-focused unit in the Leafcutter ranks, and it's the Major. And the Leafcutter Majors are really, really good fighters. So then you have to kind of say, okay, well, if that's the case, is it worth getting a media which is less expensive than a Major? And the answer is no, because you can get less than 2 media for the price of 1 major, and 1 major can easily beat 2 media. Like, I've played it out in the game many times. Like, sometimes a major can go in and kill like 3 media before the major is killed, because majors are so good at combat. Which basically means that the media they're just kind of useless in the Leafcutter ranks, because they have this weird middle role, and they have this weird, like, middle ground role where they're supposed to be better than, they're supposed to be, like, kind of a really good blend of combat and harvesting, and they're so much worse at it than the other two counterparts that are there, and the media's price is so high that it doesn't matter that they're good at collecting, that they're not. It just like, because their price is so high, you can get so many other units that are just more valuable. And so they just kind of end up being totally useless. I basically never get media when I'm playing a leaf cutter level because they're not useful. Now, they are a good combat unit and they're worth the price for their combat if you're not playing a leaf cutter level. Because you could take them and they're pretty equivalent in power to like a trapjaw ant. And trapjaw ants are really strong fighters. And like if you can get an ant that's that powerful, hey, that's a great deal. But there's only a handful of levels where they're not collecting, where you have media and they're not collecting leaves, because that's what they're designed to do. Their whole point is to be really good at harvesting leaves, and they don't even do it that well. Oh, the other argument you could say is that if the media could collect like more leaves than a major, that would be great. The problem is majors collect just as much leaves as media. So they're just in this weird, awkward spot, and they kind of suck. So I basically never use media when I'm playing those levels. I basically just get, like, 200 or 300 workers, let them just collect leaves unbelievably quickly, and then because I have so many minims, they process it really quickly, and then I just get a few majors to help back them up in combat, and then they're fine, and you can just kind of win anything like that. So yeah, that's media. Unfortunately, media are just really bad. I kind of hope that they double down on the harvesting potential, and they say that, okay, media can harvest, like, 3 times as much, as many leaves, or the bare minimum they make it so majors can't harvest leaves, because the fact that majors can harvest leaves really makes the media super just unnecessary. Like, if majors couldn't harvest leaves, the media might be a little more worth it. There's probably still not worth it because the workers are so much more efficient at collecting leaves, but they might be a little bit better. There might be an argument to take them, but right now there's just no argument to use them, ever. The only reason I didn't even put them in F is because their combat potential is quite powerful, and for their price. And in other levels, like some of the extra levels where you just get media and they're not a leaf cutter level, they're pretty good. And that's kind of the only reason that they're in D. So that's them. That was kind of a long explanation, but that's media. I feel like it's important to say. Okay, so let's see what's next. Next up are the leaf cutter majors. So it's the stun and the taunt. Now, I'm going to have a bit of a controversial opinion here. I don't know for sure, but I think in general people consider the taunt majors to be stronger than the stun. I think the stun are a little stronger than the taunt. They're both very good, and I think they're fine either way. I still think the stun is a little bit better. The reason being is because the stun, how they work is that they just stop the enemy from doing damage, period, and the taunts reduce their damage. And I just kind of prefer to stop them from doing damage, period, as opposed to reducing the damage that I'm taking. There are scenarios where one's better than the other, but in general, I say that stun are a little bit stronger. That's just me, though. There are lots of people who think the taunt are stronger, and that's fine. I can see the argument both ways. That's just my personal opinion. Yeah, so where do they go? They're quite good. I mean, they do a lot of damage, and they have a lot of health, so they're quite useful in that regard. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention. The stun, another thing that I think is a bit of an issue, especially with the taunt majors, is, and I don't think I should factor this into the rankings that much, but it's just something I think I should mention, is if you're playing them in the Formicarium challenge, I think they're a lot less useful than the stuns, because all the abilities that the majors get are beneficial if you aren't using the taunt. Because what you want to do, like, probably the best strategy in the Formicarium challenge is, once you unlock the leaf cutters, is to make sure that you have a front line of leaf cutters and black ants that are really, really tanky. You just let the ranged wood ants just destroy the enemy with their damage, and that's like the best strategy, at least that I've found. I've tried to do builds where like the majors and the black ants do a lot of damage, and the problem is the enemy ants just do way more damage than they do, even if you buff them, so you might as well just make them as tanky as possible to resist that damage, and then let the real damage dealers, which are the wood ants, just shine. So the problem is that the taunt... So the thing is, because the leaf cutters do way more damage than the black ants, you want to let the black ants die first. Like, the black ants are without a doubt the most useless unit in that group. So what you want to do is you want to let the black ants get killed first. So the best strategy is to just make sure that the leaf cutters aren't getting targeted first, because when the leaf cutters get targeted first, the damage output of your entire team gets reduced. And also leaf cutter majors are way more costly than black ants. So if you're losing leaf cutters, you're losing food way faster than you're losing black ants, which lose a lot less food when they die. So if you have the taunt, all that's doing is it's redirecting all the damage to your second most useful unit on your team, when you could be hopefully letting the damage spread out to the black ants and to the leafcutter ants. So I just don't think the taunts are really as good in that regard. I really think that the best strategy with that is to just take stun to reduce damage overall, and then, buff defense capabilities as much as possible for the front line, and then let the back line just, with the ranged ants, just destroy the enemy. It's personally my thing. That's kind of another reason why I think the taunts aren't quite as good in that regard. But again, I don't think that matters as much here. So anyway, I'm going to rank them very close together because they're both really good, but I think the stuns are a little better. And I'm going to say that they are A tier, and I think they're above the Army Ant Media. Okay, I can do that. There we go. I'm gonna put them like that because I think they're both very powerful. They're still really, really good units. I just think they're really good. I don't think they're S tier because I think the ones that are in S tier are just so... They're just so amazingly good that I just can't put them higher than that. But they're still really good units, so they're most certainly high A tier. So that's where I put the leafcutter majors. Okay, and then onto the wood ant soldiers. So I would wager that if other people were making this list, they would put the wood ant soldiers all the way at the bottom, because they kind of suck. But the reason they suck is because they have really low damage, but they're kind of tanky for their price. And I already kind of talked about this, so I won't go into it in a lot of detail, but the best strategy when you have the ranged wood ants is to make sure you have a really tanky front line. That way they can just protect the ranged ants, and the ranged ants can just rain damage down on the enemies. And these guys are the same price as black ants, but because they do less damage than black ants, and they will lose in a fight to black ants, but they have more health, which means that they're tanky in the exact situation where they need to be tanky. They don't need to do a lot of damage. That's the ranged ants' job. They just need to be tanky. That's all they need to do. They just need to be a front line. The problem is they're still not that good at it. Like, they have a lot of health relative to what their price is. It's just not that much. So it kind of... And there's some other ants in here that do their job a lot better, just being tanky and also doing damage. So they're okay, but they're not great. And because they're kind of only useful when they're paired with wood ants, it kind of becomes a little questionable how useful they are. However, the ranged wood ants are also tied for the best units in the game. So if they support the best unit in the game, maybe they're pretty good? I don't know. They're kind of a little bit of a toss-up. And because they're a little bit of a toss-up, I'm gonna put them in B. And yeah, there's probably a lot of people going like, whoa, you're putting them in B? And yeah, I think I am, because they're, well, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe C is better, but I'd still put them above Black Ants, because I think what ends, like, Black Ants are fine by themselves, but they're just kind of okay units by themselves. Whenever you pair them with any other unit, they're just not that good. Like, if you pair them with the Wood Ants, having this, like, the Wood Ant Soldier, the melee soldier, is so much more effective than having the Black Ants, because the Black Ants aren't as tanky. Yeah, they do more damage, but they're just not as tanky, and so that doesn't, it doesn't make up for, they're not doing the job they need to do, because they're not, as soon as you put Wood Ants onto the field with Black Ants are now just fodder. They are just a meat shield to protect the Wood Ants. And the Wood Ant soldier, the melee soldier, does that protection better than the Black Ants. And so I actually think they just do their job better than Black Ants when they're paired with Wood Ants. So I just think they're more useful in that regard. As a unit by themselves, they suck, and that's why they're in C. But for the job that they need to do, they're pretty good. So I'd actually put them, I think I'd put them at C. I think they're decent. And I know a lot of people will always say, like, oh, well, if, you know, your worker argument kind of invalidates them and they're kind of useless. And it's like, because like a big strategy I know people use is they say, don't bother with the melee Wood Ants because they suck, just use workers as the meat shield. And that works in the beginning of most of those levels, but toward the end, your workers just start getting killed too quickly because they don't have enough health. And so because they don't have enough health to protect the ranged Wood Ants, it kind of becomes, it kind of is like, there comes a point where it's like, okay, now I need to start getting these tankier soldiers because I can't protect my ranged Wood Ants anymore because there's not enough health among my workers to do so. So there is a point where they become useful in those levels. It comes later on in the levels, but that's usually when it's the hardest. That's usually when you have to work the hardest to make sure that, you know, that your Wood Ants actually live through this. So that's kind of, that's why I'm putting them on C. I know it's a controversial opinion. That's where I'm going to put them. Okay, next up is the Mortar Wood Ants. I kind of been debating this while I've been making this video because I wasn't really sure where I was going to put them. I think I'm going to solidly put them as the second best unit in the game. And this kind of sucks to put them here because I like the rapid fire Wood Ants way more than I like the mortars. But if I really am like being honest with myself and I really am like which one is actually more effective, it's the mortar. And I think it's pretty obvious why. The mortars do splash damage once they're level 3. The rapid fires only slow enemies. What often happens in Empires of the Undergrowth is you get a big blob where there are where all the melee bugs are just clashing with each other in the front, and then if you have Wood Ants, they're just shooting at them from range. And if you have the rapid fire and the mortars do similar DPS to single targets. So in that regard, they're pretty equal. The problem is that because you get in these big head-to-head matchups where there's a big swarm on both sides that are in melee combat, and then you have ranged units hitting from behind, it gets to a point where it is much more useful to have the splash damage so it hits the whole enemy swarm than it is to shoot one at a time. It's just there's more situations where the mortars are useful than the rapid fires. I will say the rapid fires are still pretty good. Like the rapid fires are great units. I'll just say that. The rapid fires are really great units. The problem is they're really great units in very, very specific situations. And unfortunately, the situations are so specific that I'd say there's only a handful of levels where I would say that I would prefer rapid fire over mortars. But one of those levels is one of the campaign levels, and it's the very first campaign level. It's 2. For the wood ants, it's 2.1, the beach. And the reason I take them on the beach is because in general, you're not fighting swarms of enemies. Toward the very end, you're starting to fight swarms of enemies, but it's usually like a swarm of hermit crabs. And the splash damage, it's nice to fight them, but like it's not necessary. The rapid fire is so nice when you're fighting the tiger beetles because you just slow them down and it prevents them from doing as much damage to you, and it's really good at dealing with the wolf spiders when they invade your nest because you can actually hit them. The biggest the reason so the reason I decided overall to not put the mortars as the best is because the army ant majors I think are useful in any situation. I think in any level, if you could have army ant majors, they would be great to have. The mortar wood ants are not great in every situation, but they're great in the vast majority of situations. The times where they're not good is when they're fighting really fast moving enemies. Because mortars are slow and they miss their targets a lot. Even when they're shooting at like just an ant that doesn't move that fast, they miss like their first shot or two usually. Granted, this doesn't matter that much because where most battles that are really important happen where there is two big swarms fighting each other at once, and that's when the mortars are just amazing and they just decimate the enemy. Problem is that when you're fighting the tiger beetles, sometimes the tiger beetles will run up and get to the ranged units before the mortars can even hit them once. And then they kill the mortars in like 1 or 2 hits. So the mortars might get one shot off. Whereas if you had rapid fires will get a few shots off. And if they're at level 3, they'll slow down the tiger beetle, which means they'll give themselves more time to get more shots off. And it'll give all the other ants time to not get attacked because the tiger beetle's not in range yet. Also with the wolf spiders, when the wolf spiders invade your nest and you have mortars, you just don't hit the wolf spiders until the wolf spiders decide to stand still. So the wolf spiders are just running around causing chaos in your nest the entire time until they decide to stand still, and then the mortars can kill them and they're fine at it. But when if the rapid fire ants are at level 3, sometimes they can catch the wolf spiders as they're running and slow them down enough for multiple of your team to start attacking the spiders. And so you can like preemptively stop the spiders before they do so much chaos and damage to your nest. So on that one level, the rapid fire are pretty good. And there's some of the extra levels where I would actually prefer to have the rapid fire over the mortars, and you aren't allowed to choose. Sometimes you just get one or the other. And there's some levels where I really wish I could have the rapid fires and I have the mortars. Vice versa, sometimes I have the rapid fire and I really want the mortars. But most of the extra levels give you mortar because I think the developers know that the mortars are better in most situations. And I think they also know that most people like the mortars more than the rapid fire for obvious reasons because they're so good. So, yeah, I'm not going to say the rapid fires are bad because they're quite powerful. They're just so overshadowed by the mortars that I don't think they're quite as good. And because of that, I'm going to put them in low A. Because they're still really, really good unit. I played my first few Formicarium challenge. I think my first campaign all the way through, I played with rapid fire ants. And yeah, I kind of handicapped myself because I didn't realize how good the mortars were. But they're still good. I still won all the levels on like hard difficulty, and it wasn't that difficult to do. It's not like it was a huge handicap. They're still really strong. I just think that they're situationally really I just think that situationally is where they excel. Otherwise, they're just a really good unit. And that's kind of why I'm going to place them where they are. Actually, you know what? Come to think of it, I think I'm going to place them above the Army Ant Media, because I think the Army Ant Media are just kind of generally a good unit that doesn't really excel in any particular situation. They're just generally pretty good. I think the Rapid Fire has certain situations where they're really, really good, and otherwise they're a phenomenal unit. So that's where I'm going to put them. I think they're still below the Leafcutter Majors, because I do think the Leafcutter Majors are kind of more valuable than the Rapid Fire wood ants, but they're still really, really good. I'm not underselling their power because they're really, really powerful. Okay, next up is the Slave Maker ant. And I'm just gonna put Slave Maker Ant at a solid B. They're fine. They're quite tanky, which is cool. They do quite a lot of damage. They're kind of just an upgraded version of the Black Ants, but the tankiness seems to have been upgraded by quite a lot. And then their damage was upgraded by a decent amount. And yeah, they're more expensive, but I think they're pretty worth their cost. And I think they're more worth their cost than the Black Ants are. I just think they're at a nicer medium where they're kind of on the side of they're a little pricey, but they're quite powerful, as opposed to the Black Ant's a good price, but it's kind of weak. So that's I know it's subjective. I think they could be moved around a little bit, but like I would just place them at B because I think they're a pretty solid unit. I don't know. I don't know what else to say about them. They're pretty generic. They don't have any special abilities or anything like that. I think they're pretty decent, but they're nothing absolutely spectacular. So I'll put them there. Our last ant is the Trapjaw ant. I think the Trapjaw ant has to be high B because I think they're too expensive for what they give you. But they're really, really good. The one big issue I have with them is the cost it takes to hatch a new one. Because the 90 points to place, that's fine. I don't think that's a problem. It's that they cost so much to bring back. Yeah, they cost 10 to bring back. And that's a lot. Like, the Slave Maker ants cost 6 to bring back, and I know the Slave Maker ants aren't as good, but like the Trapjaw ants cost 10. That's 5 less than either of the majors, than the Leafcutter Major or the Army Ant Major, and they're not even close to being as good as either of them. They're really good. Like, they're probably the best of the not majors in terms of the power of just their unit. But they're just so expensive. They're just really hard to upkeep. It's really difficult to justify using them if you're in a level where there's limited food, because they're just so expensive to bring back. And their jump back ability, like, they have really, really good stats. Like, they're not super tanky, but they've got quite a lot of health because they are powerful and they do a lot of damage. And their jump back ability to heal is such a good ability. Another big downside to them is that they work really poorly with the ranged units in the game. They're really great with all the melee units, but they're awful with the ranged units. And again, the ranged units are really, really good in this game. Like, again, the Mortar ants are the second best one in the game, and the rapid fire are, you know, what is that? That's 6th in the game, and they're underneath some really powerful other units. And because they work poorly, and the reason why they work poorly is because every time they jump back, they just move the line of protection closer to the ranged ants, and then that makes the ranged ants more vulnerable to getting attacked. So they don't work great as front linemen, and that's kind of another negative to them. The problem is they're really, really good. Like, I know I'm talking a lot about like the negatives of them, but this unit is so powerful. It's like, if their cost to bring back was just a little lower, like if it was 8, or I think 8 would probably be good. If it was 8 or like maybe 9, I think 8 would really solidify it for me. If they were that, they would absolutely be an A tier. Absolutely. But because they're just so expensive to bring back, and because they don't synergize that well with some really good ranged units, they're kind of not quite as good, and I think I have to kind of put them in B. So yeah, I think that's all the ants. Yeah, so this is the tier list. You know, I think I have some controversial choices on here. You know, I think the Leafcutter Major one is maybe a little controversial. I think the I think the Wood Ant melee soldiers can be very controversial, but also I placed that thing 3rd to last. It's not a good unit. I absolutely understand that. I think people will get upset that I didn't place it in like F tier or something. But yeah, anyway, I think this is interesting. I'd like to hear what people have to say about this. I'd like to hear their experiences with some of these. So yeah, I'd like to hear what people say about it. So if you have any comments to leave about this, please do so. I'd really like to have conversations about it. And then also, if you did enjoy this video, please consider giving it a like. And if you want to see more of what I have on the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell. That way you can get notified of more videos that I put out. So thank you all for watching, and have a great life, everyone.